Well, in the countdown to the national elections, the agenda has been interviewing editors from specialist desks to explore the issues that may sway public opinion and voting patterns. Now, this morning, we're joined by Sophie Mokoena, who is the international editor at SABC News. Of course, we are going to be discussing various issues, Sophie, not just the elections. But let's start talking about, of course, we're seeing the South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the ICJ now again coming to the fore. Just talk to us about how this might likely, pan out when it comes to our elections in South Africa, particularly because you have those that are strongly opposed to what is happening in the Middle East and are pro-Palestine. And you have, of course, those that are pro-Israel.
Yes, you are correct, Unathi. You know that there's a large constituency, voting constituency in South Africa that is in support of the Palestinian cause. You also have a large constituency that is sympathetic to the Israel state. And therefore, clearly during elections, those constituencies or those voters will also look at foreign policy and positions of different political parties in relation to the Middle East question. Previously, a year ago, we thought it might be the war in Ukraine, but it looks like this one, it's even more powerful in terms of the impact, because you have these constituencies or these voters who some support the Israel state and others are supporting Palestine. And therefore, it will have an impact in certain provinces, not all provinces, because when you look at the provinces, you have provinces where you have these two constituencies where they are concentrated, particularly in provinces such as the Western Cape, provinces such as KZN, provinces such as Gauteng. And therefore, in those provinces, I expect that as they go to the polls, much as they will be thinking about national issues, issues that are related to service delivery and performance of the governing party and different parties, but this matter of the Middle East, some of these voters are going to say, who can we vote for? Who will be on our side in terms of our views on global matters? And that is why you saw a party such as the EFF weighing in on global politics, including the continental politics. And for the first time, there was so much on global matters rather than particularly Africa.
I'm glad you mentioned the EFF, because of course, there's a lot of talk that, we will slightly see a coalition government in South Africa. And it becomes then important to see what is in those party manifestos. Because, of course, when we talk coalition, we want to see, which of these parties want to pick partners in terms of pro-Hamas, pro-Israel, or pro-Palestine, maybe not Hamas. Necessarily. But politically, in as far as parties are concerned, what are we likely to then see in as far as this is concerned?
They will ensure that when they deliver the manifestos, they do touch on this issue. But also, you must remember, South Africa is not an island. South Africa is playing a very important role at the global stage. And any political party that is hopeful that it will be in government or in a coalition, you must have policies that are addressing international issues, because you will have to participate on international level, whether it be at the AU level, at SADC, at the United Nations. When there are big issues to debate, South Africa is a member of the G20, South Africa is a member of the G77 plus China, South Africa is a member of the non-aligned movement. And therefore, you will have to, as a leader of a particular party that is going to be part of the coalition or going to govern, to continuously ensure that you are able to articulate South Africa's foreign policy. And we can only be able to judge that foreign policy when it's part of your manifesto as a party. If the party doesn't include international perspective, then many people are going to ask questions as to how are you going to deal with issues related to the war in Ukraine? As we saw yesterday, the president speaking to President Zelensky. This is South Africa. There's a lot that's happening. The AU is coming this weekend. You'll see the high-powered delegation. The Minister of International Relations is leaving today. The president will be there weekend. So all political parties that are saying we want to govern, we want to lead the people of South Africa, you will also have to demonstrate that capability at the regional level, SADC, continental level, and globally.
And talking about global relations, particularly as it speaks to, the US and South African relations, particularly as we speak about this Israel-Hamas war, of course it has a number of effects. We know that. We've heard from the president even before South Africa went to the ICJ. Now we know of a bill that has been approved to look into the SA-US relations, as it were, because of this Hamas-Israel war. And of course, we've spoken to the DG at DIRCO, Mr. Zain Adango, who also speaks about and weighed in of the US relations. These are sensitive times, Sophie. Perhaps just talk to us about how sensitive a time we have with, the U.S., particularly when you look at things like, the AGOA agreement that comes to, the contract comes to an end, I think, next year. I mean, there's a lot at stake here.
Well, let's start with this bill. It is a bipartisan bill, in other words, from the Republicans and the Democrats. These are individuals. Let's make it clear. It is not a Congress or a Senate approach or position. It is individuals within the Congress, some from Democrats and others from the Republicans. It's similar to South Africa. A leader of a political party in parliament can propose a bill, but it doesn't mean that bill will see the light of the day and finally becomes an act, because it will depend in terms of the support in parliament. Even a party with one member of parliament can propose a bill, but will the other party support that bill, and will that bill see the light of the day where it will be put before the president and the president will sign that into law? It's another matter. So the same thing is happening in the Congress. You have these congressmen who have put up this bill, but it is still very low and it's far. It's still, there's a long way to go before you can even entertain this issue with vigor and power, because the Congress has got so many members with different views, particularly in relation to global matters, and South Africa in particular. You also have the Black Caucus members who are in the Congress who see things differently from the others. You have people who are sympathetic to the administration that is in power currently under Biden. We know the Biden administration launched a reach out program to strengthen the relations between Africa and the US. And that program was launched by the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, in South Africa when he was in South Africa. It was not a coincidence that it was launched in South Africa, because South Africa is the second largest economy. It's an influential country on the continent. No country in the world that really wants to have a serious impact in the South and on the continent can ignore South Africa. Let me make an example. We did ask the former South African President Thabo Mbeki last year that question around the relations between South Africa and the US, looking at the time towards AGOA meeting here in South Africa. He was quite clear that if America is serious in terms of strengthening the relations with Africa, you cannot ignore South Africa. And if you pull out South Africa of AGOA, you sideline South Africa, you isolate South Africa economically, how many American companies that are flourishing in South Africa will be affected? And by extension, some of these companies, they are linked to the European Union countries. Let's take, for example, Mercedes-Benz and the BMW. Whatever production they have in South Africa, those products don't end up in Europe, they go to America. And therefore, you see the value chain, how it's going to be affected. And therefore, it's not an easy thing. And now recently, the Minister of International Relations was speaking to Blinken. Why? Because South Africa and America will always differ on many issues, but they will always have to use diplomatic channels to find a way to continue.
And I would agree with you on that because, of course, as we were speaking to Zane Dango, he also mentioned that, that whilst they are concerned that this is happening, they've got a very strong relationship with the U.S. In fact, they're saying that they might be sending a delegate soon to the U.S. to engage further. But I don't want to beleaguer the point of this, which probably also speaks to why South Africa is still pushing ahead with the ICJ. I mean, they've written a letter in light of what's currently happening in the Middle East, as far as the Rafah border post is concerned. But let's move on now to other continental news, particularly war-torn countries where there is also large humanitarian crises. We've got Sudan, we've got the DRC, where also there is, millions of people who are displaced, thousands who have died. Where is the focus on that crisis?
Well, we know that yesterday the president issued a statement in relation to deployment of South African troops in the eastern part of the DRC. Actually, the deployment happened in December. You saw the statement. And South Africa has been in the DRC fighting side by side as an intervention force with the MONUSCO, that is the United Nations peacekeeping mission. But the UN is now pulling out because there was pressure from DRC that they must pull out. Now MONUSCO is leaving in April. You are now left with the SADC troops. Angola is part of that. Malawi is part of that. Therefore, these are the perhaps interventions to try and help the DRC. But the problem of the DRC is political. No military intervention will resolve the problems of the DRC. It will take a political will and a leader who will reach out to all different groups and constituencies in the DRC to deal with the problems of the DRC. The military intervention is temporal. It's not going to stop that crisis. The same with Sudan. The military intervention, it's not going to stop the crisis. There must be a political process and a political will to all people who are involved or stakeholders to find one another.
Now, finally, as we wrap up, just looking at the global landscape, there are a number of elections happening across the country, across the globe. Of course, we are going to one crucial election not too long from now, between May and August. But also elsewhere, there are elections. Just touch on a few that we should be keeping our eyes on in 2024.
Russia, United Kingdom, United States of America, and you can see that Joe Biden is in trouble. He is really in trouble. When you look at the protests in these big cities, London, Paris, Washington, New York, in support of the Palestinians. It speaks to, it looks like some leaders around the world, the very same leaders who will seek re-election, they are far removed from ordinary citizens. And therefore, the global factor will play itself, particularly in those big countries. And I think South Africa, with strong relations with Russia, United Kingdom being one of some of among countries we are doing business with, and also the United States of America, as we pointed out, and spoke about the ICJ. But the good thing with the United States of America, when they respond to South Africa's ICJ, they are not really criticizing South Africa. They are just saying the case is weak, because they know that is a democratic process in relation to the United Nations system and multilateral system, because this court is a world court, it's a UN organ, and they are signatories of that court, and therefore they cannot say people mustn't go to that court. When that court was set up to settle disputes peacefully among countries.
Sophie, thank you so much. Of course, a lot on your plate, and I'm sure that this is not going to be our final conversation as we look at what is currently happening international. Of course, that was international news editor Sophie Mokoena.